And good evening to those of you in Europe, and good morning to those of you awake in Australia. Welcome to Session 4 of the ESIG 2021 Fall Technical Workshop. I'm Charlie Smith, the Executive Director of ESIG, and I'll provide a few brief opening remarks. As I think you know, we are a global membership-based nonprofit organization providing objective technical information, resources, and networking opportunities in support of grid transformation and energy systems integration decisions. We do this through workshops, tutorials, webinars, blogs, working groups, and task forces for our members, and by producing technical resource materials and briefing materials for decision makers. Our workshop sessions are all being held online and are open to everyone. This workshop was planned with the input of our ESIG Offerings Committee, chaired by Bethany Frew of NREL and Julia Matoivasan of ERCOT. The committee consists of the chairs of our 6 working groups and several of our board members. We have a great set of volunteers who really make ESIG what it is, and we encourage you to become involved if you're not already. You can find us on the web at esig.energy, send an email to info@esig.energy to get our monthly newsletter, and follow our activities on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. ESIG also serves a leadership role in the Global Power System Transformation Consortium, often called GPST, whose mission is to bring together key actors from around the world to catalyze a rapid clean energy transition at unprecedented scope and scale. ESIG leads Pillar 1 of the GPST, which deals with the research agenda for the system operators. More information on GPST can be found at globalpst.org. In the workshop sessions this month, you'll see the range of issues that need our attention today. If you participate in our working groups and task forces, you'll be working with world-class domain experts on issues that need our attention tomorrow and will be on the agendas of our future workshops. As I mentioned a minute ago, ESIG is a membership-based organization, and that is why your membership and your participation in ESIG are so important. If you are the member point of contact for your organization, please keep an eye out for the annual dues invoice later this month. I thank you if your organization is currently a member and strongly encourage you to consider joining if you're not. Regarding logistics for today, I would ask you to note that the session will be 1 hour and 45 minutes to allow a little more time for both presentation and discussion. We'll be doing something a little different today with 4 20-minute time slots for the panelists to present and discuss each presentation, followed by 20 minutes of general discussion and Q&A after the last speaker. As we are doing with all of our webinars now, we'll be using the Slido platform for managing the Q&A. You should go to slido.com on your device and enter ESIG19 as the event code to ask your questions. Please be sure to indicate the person to whom you're addressing the question. The instructions are also at the bottom of the background slide for the webinar, and you'll be reminded by the session chair. You'll see a thumbs up button next to the question on Slido to allow you to vote on prioritizing the questions submitted. So please keep the questions coming during the presentations, and we will address them at the end. We will follow up with written answers to any questions we don't get to during the Q&A. Recognizing the limitations of a webinar with more than 100 people on the lines will be muted. So again, we ask you to use the Slido platform to ask your questions, with ESIG19 as the event code. We would also ask you, if you're comfortable, to identify yourself when you ask a question so we know who we're talking with. Today's session is titled Rate Alignment and Demand Participation. There's some very innovative work and deep thinking going on in the world of rates and demand participation, and today we'll hear about some of the latest developments in thinking from North America. The developments over the last couple of years are rather dramatic, and I think we can expect a lot more to come. The increased attention being paid to all aspects of rates and DER is just another indication of the impact that this evolving field is having on the traditional utility business model. Ahmad Faruqui is a principal at Brattle, a long-standing member of ESIG, and will chair our session today. Ahmad leads Brattle's practice in understanding and managing the changing needs of energy consumers, running the gamut from rate design to all aspects of DER. He is a familiar face to anyone who's working in this area, having been involved since his time with EPRI in the early 1980s. He brings a valuable perspective and a lot of insight to everything that he does. He's a good friend of ESIG, and I'm very happy to have him here sharing this session today. Ahmad, we appreciate your participation, and I'll now turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Charlie. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about a topic that I believe is in everyone's mind today, whether or not you are a customer who has DER or a customer who doesn't have DERs. You probably have a friend or a neighbor who has one or is about to get one. This is really something that we had anticipated for years and years, possibly decades, but now it's real. The costs of the grid have gone up, the cost of the DERs have gone down. And if you line up those two curves, basically we are approaching a tipping point where more and more customers are going to embrace DERs. One utility in California is projecting that by the year 2045, 50% of their customers will have rooftop solar panels, and maybe of that number, 25 to 45% will also have paired them with batteries. There's also an expectation that EVs are going to grow fast as more and more manufacturers introduce EV models. Each car will put a lot of load on the grid, but also have a big battery, which perhaps hypothetically could be used in a vehicle to grid charging mode. And just a confession that I should make, I am one of those customers now. I have an EV, I have solar panels, I have battery storage paired with the solar panels. I am on a time of use rate, and I have as efficient a set of appliances that I can manage. Of course, it takes a lot of money, but the payback is real. It's less than 10 years for many of these investments. And so as the costs come down, you'll see more and more of this happening. And certainly not just in California, where just about half of the DERs are located today. California has about 12% of the US population, but 50% of the DERs. Why? Because it has very high prices, and also because reliability due to the wildfires is beginning to now really suffer. Again, every other state is looking at these issues, not just within the US, but throughout the globe. Australia is another example where you have a lot of DER activity, particularly in terms of rooftop solar, but they have hardly any electric cars there. Europe is at the other end of the spectrum. They have a lot of electric cars, but not a whole lot of rooftop solar. Norway, you may have read, last month, 100% of the new cars sold in Norway were EVs. So what does all of this mean for the grid? What does it mean for all of us as customers, as energy experts, as professionals in the field, regulators, perhaps consultants, academics, and ultimately for the utilities that have to make sure the power is there at a reasonable price for all of their customers? That's the challenge ahead of us, and that is what session 4 is focused on. How do you align rates to encourage demand side participation in DERs, and how do you do that in a way that helps all customers and not just those with DERs? So we are fortunate to have a panel here comprised of experts from all aspects of the industry: utilities, regulators, economists, and experts who have worked in many aspects of this business in their long and illustrious careers. The way the session is organized is a little different from how other sessions are typically organized. Each speaker will take 10 minutes to answer a question, and I will ask them the question and they'll take 10 minutes to answer it. And then the rest of the panelists will ask that speaker questions on the presentation they have just heard, and I may add a question or two myself. We will have 10 minutes of panelist questions after 10 minutes of the speaker presentation. And then we'll go to the next speaker, and then the third, and then the fourth. I'll introduce them one at a time just before they're going to present. But let me tell you the topics they're going to talk about, just to put things in perspective. So the first topic is innovative pathways to 100% renewables. And Doug Smith from Green Mountain Power is going to present that. He's the chief power supply executive at that utility. The second presentation will be called Orchestrating Demand. It'll be by Tom Hines, who's the principal at Tierra Resource Consultants and works very closely with a number of utilities, in particular with Arizona Public Service. The third speaker is going to be Dick O'Neill. He is a chief economist at FERC and a distinguished research fellow at ARPA-E. He's going to talk about bid-in demand participation models. The fourth speaker is going to be Mike Oldak. He has his own consulting firm called Oldak Consulting, and he's going to talk about retail pricing and consumer demand. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And with that, let me ask Doug Smith to please address us on the topic of what are some of the tools that Green Mountain Power is currently using to manage some important electric end users, and why are they doing this? As I said, Doug is Chief Power Supply Executive at Green Mountain Power. Doug, over to you.
Folks, thank you, Ahmad. So yeah, I'm the leader of the power supply team here at Green Mountain Power. That means these days, spending a lot of time along with my colleagues thinking about strategies on designing and implementing strategies to get to a highly renewable and ultimately 100% renewable power supply. Today I'll share some experiences and tools that we think are going to be useful on that path. Hopefully you will too. We can learn a bit from each other, and appreciate the opportunity to hit leadoff here on this is pretty strong batting order. Hopefully I can do as well as the Red Sox have been doing at the top of their order this week. Briefly about Green Mountain Power, we're an integrated utility, large by Vermont standards, but pretty small by national standards. That can be a good thing, since a limited size and a close connection with our customers can help customer-facing programs work well. And we've also got Vermont regulators here who I think the same way. They have an openness to trying new programs and adapting based on experience. That's also a helpful thing. I mentioned we're headed toward highly renewable. So first, think of our scale. We're roughly a 700 megawatt peak utility these days, around 4 million megawatt hours a year, ISO New England market. We've got a renewable energy standard that's heading towards 75% renewable in about a decade, with a carve out for distributed ones. And GMP has stated our intent to aim for 100%. So we got a lot of work in front of us. We already have in progress an extraordinary build out of in-state distributed solar. Capacity of that's about 50% of our annual peak load right now. So that is a big characteristic of our system and the power supply we're going to see. Today, I'm going to introduce just a few tools or offerings that our customers participate in. A few notable features to look for as I go through them. One is that there is an element of direct control in each of these. They're generally not static resources that do the same thing every day. And they're also largely being used for peak reduction. That's the biggest bang for the buck today, but we see more use cases developing in this renewable transition. First, our home battery storage offerings. The core of this is Tesla Powerwalls, although other technologies are eligible. The Tesla program is a lease one, so Green Mountain Power owns the equipment and essentially reflects the costs and the power supply benefits that we can get along with the lease revenues in our retail cost of service. The key feat, we got about 16 megawatts so far, so that's 2.5% of our peak demand. And the key feature of this is that GMP can use the batteries to charge or discharge for the purpose of grid benefits, okay? And the estimated value from that gets used to reduce the lease price. So that's the core thing. And the corollary to that is that the participants in this particular program, they're not using their battery systems for other things, like to maximize in-home consumption of solar that they might have in a home system, or to follow a time of use rate. It's sort of a free agent battery where GMT tries to swing for the maximum value. Here's an image of what it looked like in a peak event. I think that was last year. And essentially, on this chart, upward means discharge, negative number means charging. So at about 1600, a peak event was called, and it's pretty much like dropping a hammer. We got essentially full response from our Powerwall fleet, and 2.5 hours or so later, we went into a gradual recharging mode. As a power supply guy, that's a pretty crisp response, you know. Another end use and a program is controlled EV charging. This is going to be big, we think, as electric vehicle charging loads scale up and become, for us, tens and hundreds of megawatts of potential load. The short story here is it's a free level 2 charger offering for customers who buy or lease a new EV. And the customers need to participate in one of 2 supportive retail rate programs. As you'll probably tell by my later comments, I'm a fan of the managed charging one. In that one, our staff, like my teammates, pick out and call events that may be potential peak events. And during those, the charger output is reduced or stopped via an internet instruction. EV customer can buy through it, but it does cost noticeably more. So far, we've got a very high adoption of this, in excess, I think, of 75% of the vehicles in a recent period, and very few opt-outs. Here's a visual of what this one looked like. This picture's a little stale. We got closer to 1,000 EVs now, but just to stick with this clean image from last year, peak was called during the shaded area, and the dark blue line is the metered consumption of the participating customers. Basically went to near zero during the rated period, the peak period. But I guess my 2 notable things are that the collective load of this would have been, we estimate, 15% or less of the installed charging load if we hadn't controlled it. The other thing is, look at that bounce back. And the right-hand side of the curve, that's something we're going to need to watch as this scales up to megawatts and ultimately tens of megawatts. We're going to have a more sophisticated discharge pattern. It's not just see the peak and shoot at it, if you will. Final one I wanted to call your attention to, we call this flexible load management pilot. This is basically about commercial buildings and industrial processes and trying to build experience and tools at the customer and here to help expand management of these loads. I guess that's the high level story. Participating customers, they get sent a signal of a peak event, and they get paid for load reductions during those windows. The majority, but not all, of the wholesale power or transmission savings go to them. That's the current mode. In the future, we think that some other use cases are going to step to the fore as the regions and our power supply evolve. The renewable transition, if I call it. So the short story about that is, think about Green Mountain Power. We've got, even today, an amount of intermittent renewables that almost, collectively, are almost a nameplate capacity equal to our peak demand. And that'll probably double in the next decade. And so they've got some characteristic, each with their characteristic fluctuations, but this is going to become a dominant factor in our energy portfolio. Here's an illustration of that. On the left-hand side, we have, this is a recent a month, daily quantities, that's the y-axis of our renewable, our owned generation from hydro, solar, and wind. I mean, look at this. On the whole, it all averages out, but we've got 2 to even 4 times difference between the lowest days and the high days. That's why I say that from a portfolio perspective, energy shifting will likely become a more valuable and important use case. and longer duration tools, more flexible load over many hours, not just a couple, and storage technologies will be needed too. And similarly, on the right-hand side, that's just an illustration. Our region is doing this too. If their decarbonization ambitions are met, we're going to have a region whose power fluctuates something like the chart on the left, and the instances of negative locational marginal prices or high spikes as well are probably going to become more prevalent. So those are the types of use cases we see developing in the future. And I think those are really the highlights that I wanted to communicate, except to say at GMP and probably at other utilities, we're going to need more systems to leverage this. Right now, we have some, not standalone, but partially coordinated systems. We're going to need to gain skills at orchestrating these resources and managing them together as a package. That's a skill we're going to need to learn more about and have some tools to help us with. So I hope that was a helpful introduction to what we've been doing and some of how we're looking forward, Ahmad.
Excellent, Doug. That was an incredible presentation. You certainly have laid out a very cutting-edge approach to integrating DERs. I have a couple of quick questions just as a follow-up, and then I'd invite the other panelists to put their questions to you as well. So the first program you mentioned involving the Tesla Powerwall, I can see what benefit there is to Green Mountain Power in being able to access the customer's battery. You mentioned that it is leased to the customer. And so my question for you is, what's in it for the customer? I somehow am missing the value proposition to the customer. Why are they leasing this from you, paying you money? What do they get out of it? I can see what you get out of it, but what do they get out of it? So that's my first question. Why don't I let you respond to that?
The short story would be that what the participating customers are getting out of it is what we've seen to be a pretty high performing home backup system at a price that is over the term of the lease way less than it would be to simply purchase that system or lease it on your own and let it sit there and be a backup source. Rather, they're getting it at a price that reflects the cost of building or leasing and installing the system minus the estimated grid benefits from peak management. And I think we have a couple others in there. Basically, less those grid benefits equals a substantially reduced lease price compared to just doing it themselves. That's the primary thing. And you can see
how much do they pay?
The present price for this is for 2 Powerwalls. So think 10 kilowatts and around 27 kilowatt hours is something like $50 per month. And it's not free. It's a significant price, but many customers feel that it's worthwhile, particularly those that are on maybe a more rural circuit. And frankly, they have exposure to longer duration outages, or maybe they have solar and they would like that they see the possibility for a long duration backup system that isn't fossil fuel.
Got you. Okay. Thank you. The other question I have is about the TOU rate. Is that just for the EVs or is that for the whole house? Where you're providing them the free level 2 charger, are you able to provide them a TOU rate just for the EVs?
I believe that is just, I probably have to check on that, Ahmad. I believe, though, that it is applied in this case on a device basis to the EV itself.
Yeah, okay, got you. Excellent. But thank you. Let me see if the other panelists have some questions for you. We roughly have 8 minutes. I do have a couple of other questions, but let's see if our fellow panelists have any follow-ups there. Tom.
Hi, Ahmad. This is Tom. I have one. Hey, Doug, great presentation. I'm curious, very selfishly, we're moving down the path of connecting more EVs and really battling a bit with so many customers on TOU rates, what the incremental value of load managed EVs is over the baseline that we get when customers just have a really good incentive to shift based on pricing. So just curious your thoughts on that, and if you've seen, you know, good demonstration that you're getting incremental value from managing charging versus just providing the rate signal.
That's a good question, and I would say we're learning about that. So it's not like we got all the answers here, okay? But we do observe that we're seeing, how do I say this? The events today in our regional power market and with the market rules that we participate in, many of the biggest bang for the buck events where charging or discharging the power wall has the most wholesale value tend to be ones that are not uniform. They don't happen, for example, Monday through Friday, day after day, but they're on particular days, where today it's mostly peak load conditions. All right. So in our case, I suspect that although I haven't quantified it, that there is meaningful value and less wear on the battery from a targeted or dynamic deployment, as opposed to setting up a fixed time of use, for example. That's partly, I think, reflective of our conditions here in Vermont, in New England, where if we have a summer or winter peak, typically not like that 10 straight days, for example. Some of your clients may have that. Typically, it's a few days at a time. And after that, there may be days which aren't even close to a peak event in the same very week.
Yeah, thanks. And I think it's really clear with batteries. I think to me, it's still less clear with EVs, what incrementally you get. If you could just establish the right charging behavior, maybe you get the vast majority of the value.
We agree, and I would just say my caveat may have, at the beginning, current market rules, current conditions may have sounded a little academic, if you will, but we face here in New England significant peak-based charges for transmission and for capacity, and we don't yet have a daily energy profile which has violent price spreads. I wouldn't be surprised in this next decade if the spreads start to grow and provide some more value to price signals like you're describing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Ahmad, this is Mike Oldak.
Sure.
Doug, I think you've done an incredible job, and again, Vermont seems to be leading the way. And so I'll be a little picky here, so pardon me. But I never talk about resources as power walls or EVs or whatever. I always talk about supply, demand, storage. And really, you're picking up the main points here, and you have plans for getting down to the nitty gritty. I mean, I was part of DOE when PURPA came out in the 70s, and we were doing load management of water heaters, which can float for 4 hours. And so, you know, if you're looking at an EV, it's a load, it's a storage, it's a supply. And are you looking at plans on expanding, taking into account all these resources? And the one thing I've also seen is that electric utilities and customers have blinders, and they look at this as electric utility modernization. If you consider, probably, I know a lot of utilities, their main load is water pumping load for the water utility, which can be, you know, moved around also. So I always look at optimizing all the resources of the electric, gas, and water utilities, along with the resources on the customer side of the meter. And I really agree with you that you have to look at this from a grid perspective rather than individuals doing their own thing. So I guess my question is, have you looked at expanding this, or you're not at that point yet in your strategy?
Oh, that's good. There's a few themes in there. I guess I would say GMP is certainly looking at expanding the broadening the use cases for these resources. One example, just by coincidence, I have it on this page here for the home battery storage. We started with peak shaving, but during this year, we've gotten a subset of customers who volunteered to participate to enroll the power walls they lease in the frequency regulation market in ISO New England. This is early days, but it seems to so far be a very strongly or precisely responding resource, okay? So that's an example, plus energy shifting that we talked about of new use cases. We also do envision, though, expanding or broadening our load, I'll call them load management, but resources, and utilizing them more as a coordinated package. This is one example where perhaps our small scale hurts us a little bit. 16 megawatts plus a handful of megawatts in other programs sounds real good as a fraction of our load. It's not too large in a national scale, and we're still trying to figure out what are the best systems to help us do what I think you're describing, which is get more skilled at orchestrating the load as a whole.
Great.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So Mike, do you have a follow-up?
No, I'll leave
Okay,
everybody.
good. I have a quick follow-up before we switch to the next speaker. Mike brought up some interesting issues there. And I guess one question that I have is, I believe you said you have about 2,000 EVs today that are on this program where you're providing them the free level 2 charges, and in return you have dynamic charging times for them that might vary by day. How many Powerwall customers do you have through your first program?
Couple things. I think it's closer to 1,000 rather than 2 so far on the EVs. I apologize. I didn't look that up before we came in here. The Powerwalls, we have, I think, I'm going to have to give you a rough magnitude, but it's on the order of a couple thousand customers.
Okay.
For a sense of scale, GMP has around 250,000 accounts in total, and the net metered solar I mentioned, that's now getting to more than a few percent. That's up to something like 14,000, just for a sense of scale.
14,000.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's more than a couple percent now, pushing closer to 5 of customers participating basically in generation in some way. Yes.
Okay, so if I add those all up, just in round numbers again, I am getting a number that's under 20,000 for all of those 3 innovative technologies that you mentioned, batteries, solar, and EVs. So you earlier mentioned that you have more than 250,000 customers or some number like that. So my question is, are you offering some innovative programs for the rest of the customers as well? And if so, what is the participation level that you have reached with those customers?
We do have a number. I'm probably not the best person to introduce the whole group. The ones we certainly have been focusing on the larger loads. I mentioned back at the beginning, we have some commercial programs called curtailable or critical peak. On the residential side, we have more than 10,000, I believe, still electric water heaters who are enrolled in a form of control. And I guess I'd summarize that by saying we're looking at that end use particularly as one to find what's our next path, what's the best path forward. And in short, our previous offering has been basically an on-off switch, if you will. Don't heat the water during a defined period. But what can we do to expand the flexibility, and how do we set up the program, for example, to preheat the water or have more flexibility? That's what we're trying to figure out right now.
Exactly, and that has built-in storage, right? So that's a very natural load. Well,
Yes, sir.
Doug, this is incredible. We will come back to you towards the end of the session, and of course, you will be asking questions of the other panelists, paying them in kind, as the saying goes. So, thank you very much. The next speaker is Tom Hines, and the question that Tom's going to address is, how can utilities work with customers to co-manage DERs to meet grid resource needs? And what happens if we are not proactive about managing DERs as they're added onto the grid? I think those are absolutely critical questions for more and more utilities that are seeing the rapid penetration of DERs. Is it something to worry about? Is it something to write home about? Or is it something to get excited about and celebrate with a cake? So, Tom, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Ahmad, and thanks to Debbie and everybody at ESIG for having us having this great panel today. Again, I'm Tom Hines with Tierra Resource Consultants. I've done a lot of work with Arizona Public Service Company over the years, and today I want to focus on the approach that APS has taken to try to be as customer-centric as possible on the path to 100% clean. In a lot of ways, Doug and I have presented at conferences together before. In a lot of ways, we represent very parallel paths to thinking about resource needs, but in very different climates and different customer bases. And so I think it's interesting to look at the different approaches to kind of working with customers to get there. And so what I wanted to focus on was not to start with really the size of APS's territory or anything, which I think is almost prerequisite for all utility presentations, but really think a little bit about the philosophy around the portfolio. And our guiding principles have really changed as the needs of customers and stakeholders and the resource needs in Arizona have changed. And so increasingly and very excitingly for me, who's a clean energy advocate for my whole career, is thinking about the portfolio of customer programs and really beyond just demand side management programs, but DER programs in general, distributed energy resource programs, that we think about them a little differently than we used to, which used to be about kind of counting kilowatt hours. And now it really starts with thinking about ways that we can help to meet that clean energy commitment. And obviously, when we think about DSM, everybody leaps to energy efficiency as a tool, and it's a valuable tool in our toolkit. But as I think you heard with Doug and Ahmad, and I think what you'll see across our presentations is increasingly load shifting. And load shifting in a smart way to think about how we align usage with intermittent renewables is how we're going to get to clean. And we, by virtue of the definition of it, have to work with customers to get there. And that means really thinking hard about customer use cases and what makes sense for the grid in terms of clean. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we're doing that. But you're not going to get there without being affordable. And we think about affordability with, first of all, aligning programs with resource needs and not being wasteful about program spending that's not really driving in the right direction. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And sometimes that takes reorienting your programs and really thinking about your annual 8,760 hours of the year hourly load shake that you're doing with all your programs. And what we're really believers in also is thinking about how time differentiated rates can be brought into alignment and made easier through DSM programs, services, and technologies. So we think about, sensible rate options for customers paired with good education, paired with enabling tools that make it easy to shift load on a daily basis, make that load shifting reliable, and really help customers on time differentiated rates. And also, when we're doing all these things, we're reducing cost of service for everyone, not just program participants. So we're big believers in that as well. And that really leads to the next one, which is reliability. And in the Southwest, thinking about how renewables, this increased impact of renewables on the grid, which has been very beneficial in terms of clean, but creates a very different picture in terms of what resource needs you're trying to meet with sort of net grid loads that you see ramping up extremely quickly during late afternoon periods when solar is starting to reduce production. And so how can we use a combination of TOU rate signals and load management and shared management of DER devices to help customers on their bills and also help us with reliability needs on the grid. And then doing it in a way that's customer focused, that's easy, convenient, and makes sense for customers in the way that we're doing it, and is easy for customers to adopt grid behaviors that benefit everyone. And I'm a real stickler about, let's try to do this proactively before bad grid behaviors get adopted, and then they're just going to be harder to transition from. So that's kind of the philosophy we have. And the reason that, necessity is the mother of invention. And in the state of Arizona, we're blessed with being in a region that has a lot of solar energy. Doug was mentioning solar, being increasingly sometimes, inexpensive or even free. And what we see in the energy imbalance market across the Western states is something like 80 days a year, where the middle of the day we see significant hours that are actually at negative prices, 100% clean energy being offered at 0 or negative prices. This overlays the classic duck curve image, and we tried to make it a little fun. But what's behind that is really interesting. That's the actual load savings profile of the APS commercial lighting program. And you can see where, if you're not thinking in a smart way about holistically about your programs, you can actually be paying customers for savings that may actually be exacerbating your duck curve problem and not helping your resource needs. And you may be paying for savings during a time when you could be acquiring 100% renewable energy, clean energy for your customers at negative prices. So we really need to think hard about that. What's that avoided cost value, or is there an avoided cost value at certain times of day and times of the year? So that's a little bit about why, is trying again to align with the changing resource needs and trying to bring more renewables onto the grid. The what is that we took a path to say we want to have a distributed energy resource management platform that really started with thermostats. As you can imagine, in Arizona, that's a big driver, certainly of our summer peaks, but also includes things like water heaters that are a low-cost storage opportunity to help customers both on their rates and help us store some of that solar energy. Storage rewards, that is a program that works with battery customers that we are just in the process of expanding. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then solar communities, where we're doing inverter control on APS-owned solar inverters in solar community projects. So all of this designed in what we call a single pane of glass framework, so that our distribution operations center and our resource planning group, our resource acquisition group, and our trading floor can also all see this in real time and use it in real time. And so, again, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we're thinking about this, though, in terms of how it's going to help us meet our future carbon goals. And I wanted to share this slide that I think is a really interesting picture that underlines the importance of load shifting as a tool here. You'll see this is in 2024. This is a graphic that is across each month of the year, a forecast of approximately the daily picture for APS's system-wide marginal carbon intensity. So this is hourly, each month of the year. And the real takeaway here is, if you look at that midday, not surprisingly, this looks pretty similar to a duck curve. If you look at that midday when we've got all that solar resource, it is not a shock, but I think it's really impactful that when you look at marginal carbon intensity, that number at the bottom of the trough is 1/3 the marginal carbon intensity that you see up in that peak area between 3 and 8 p.m. You'll see I also put dotted blue lines on this chart, and that shows the APS on-peak retail rate period for customers, for residential. And so what you see is that we can help customers shift their load, and things like pre-cooling, for instance, to shift that load, that HVAC load, from the afternoon peak to save them money on their TOU rates. And each one of those kilowatt hours also shifts a lot of carbon out of our system. I'm going to show you how that looks in a Cool Rewards event. So Cool Rewards, like I said, is our smart thermostat program. And the way we look at this, and I think it's interesting trying to think about the interplay between time of use and demand response. So we think of customers doing time of use every weekday and around our retail rates. But these are DR events that are occurring in addition to that, or sometimes not everyone's doing that time of use shifting. And so these are DR events. And I use this slide to show not only how we're doing DR events, because I think it's a good example, but how it's actually saving carbon each time we do an event. So you'll notice that in this chart, you'll see from 12 to 3 p.m., you'll see that orange triangle that's above the x-axis. And that's actually showing an emissions increase per thermostat. All this is showing is what the emission picture looks like on a day that we do an event. And that indicates that 3-hour period, we're doing a pre-cooling. And so we're actually increasing usage a bit, but we're doing it at a time when we have a lot of solar and when we're driving a lot of reduced carbon. That green section in the middle is the DR event. I'm not going to go into that in super detail, but we have a pre-period, a gap, and then a setback. And then you'll see a little snapback at the end. The interesting thing here is that every time we do an event, every thermostat is saving us about 1/3 of a kilogram of carbon every time we do an event. I'm going to keep going here quickly, Ahmad, and go through the last 2 slides. This shows the fact that we're doing events kind of late in the peak period from 6 to 8 p.m. We do that for 2 reasons. One is on TOU rates, we want to make sure that we're always releasing a thermostat after the peak period is over so that we're not creating a new peak for a customer. But also, I thought this was really interesting. This is a CAISO picture from August of 2020 when there were actually power shortages in the region. And you'll see that the power shortage does not occur during the grid's peak. It occurs during the net peak that happens after solar starts to come off the grid, when you'll see that's when the actual resource need is the greatest. So at this time, Cool Rewards gave us about 20 megawatts. This past summer, we were seeing 70 megawatts during that same time period as we scaled up the program. And then this is my last slide. I just want to give a little touch on some things we're doing to continue to scale. We have rolled out a new program this year with Oracle O-Power that is encouraging TOU customers by giving them direct feedback on a weekly basis about how they're managing their TOU rates and giving them tips about how to better manage it and kind of use their own history to give them some examples of how they can progress. We've been doing more and more with Marketplace. Our online marketplace launched a year ago. We've had over 600,000 unique customer visits with a customer base of just over 1 million customers. So we've really impacted a lot of customers. And the big driver there is to help them engage in purchase of DERs and hopefully enrolling them in our programs. And that has led to scaling our Cool Rewards demand response program to just about double the impacts that we saw last summer. And I'm excited that we are about to do the same thing with batteries in the new residential storage pilot that just launched about 2 weeks ago on October the 5th, I believe. So thanks. That's it for me. Ahmad, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks very much. I mean, that was quite a tour. One question is, as you mentioned, APS has a lot of customers and TOU rates. My numbers tell me it's the largest percentage of any utility that has an opt-in TOU program. The last time I checked, it was around 2/3 of the customers are on TOU rates. However, APS does not really push hard on critical peak pricing or dynamic pricing programs like Oklahoma Gas and Electric. Instead, you bring in dynamic response through, for example, the smart thermostat control. Did APS consider doing it via dynamic pricing, and did it decide that that was not the way to go, and instead it was better to do it this way? What were the pros and cons there?
You know how it is. It's always this microcosm of a lot of different influences, and there were some regulatory drivers towards doing some additional demand response with customers, and we've continued down that path. We've seen it has value. We love the telemetry we get from it so that it's visible, and it makes it a lot on our system. That's really important. And what I found is that that has had value beyond maybe what a bit of uncertainty about rate responsiveness in very critical periods of longer term weather. So that's not to say that we don't believe in the potential for things like dynamic and critical peak pricing. And I'm going to be doing more along those lines, I think, in the near future. But this was an opportunity to do something with DR. There was some regulatory momentum behind it, and we took advantage of that for benefit of customers.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And by the way, OG&E does dynamic pricing, but it couples it with smart thermostats. So that gives them the assurity that the response will occur.
And I'm a big believer in that. BG&E also has done some of that. And in the
Yes,
work we're doing for Duke, we're also looking at that kind of
combination of
responsiveness. Yeah.
both. So what's in it for the customer who is in one of these programs? What do they gain out of having the utility control their thermostat? I mean, isn't that like an intrusion into their life, a bit Orwellian? Like, grandma telling them what to wear to a wedding?
Yeah, and you know what's interesting? We did focus groups, and that can be, and with some customers, this is not a program for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
What we semantics matter. We never talk control. We talk about co-managing or shared capacity, and that matters. We've done focus groups again to talk to customers, and what we found is that they're already working with their smart thermostat manufacturer to optimize, and so they're like, "Good, I want you to do that." And they actually like the fact that we are partnering with the manufacturer to work together to bring these kind of benefits to them as an individual and the grid as a whole. I found that they're overall, once customers understand that, they're very supportive of it, and actually it improves their customer sat.
And what share of customers would you say fall into that category? Like I mentioned, 2/3 are on time of use rates. What share are on these interactive dynamic programs?
A smaller share today. We are still under 100,000 customers in total. We've had a lot of engagement on our EE programs over the years, and I'm really proud that, for instance, I think we have the largest percentage of Energy Star homes of any metro area in the United States in Phoenix. That makes us better candidates for being able to load shift in a way that customers don't notice, because we've built good thermal envelopes in our state. And so, big believer in that. And now it's a matter of taking those connected devices and really growing that. Today, we've got about 53,000 thermostats, and that is by far the largest single engagement. And so we're actually closer to probably 60,000 total connected devices or less. With that to be growing, and what we want to do is, as customers are adopting these, we've had about 97% stickiness with customers who use our EE smart thermostat incentive and take us up on pre-enrolling and demand response through our marketplace. So I'm a big believer in converting customers into the program at the time, giving them a free thermostat as part of the reward for participating, and then an ongoing annual incentive for staying with us.
Excellent. Well, I mean, this is certainly a very, very encouraging picture that you've laid out, and it sort of complements what we heard earlier from Doug. So let me see, and I'll open up to the other panelists. Let's see if Mike has a question, or possibly Dick or Doug.
I had one, Doug Smith here. Yeah, that was informative, and thank you, Tom. My question was about, I can't resist, as a power guy, I think you mentioned something like, for example, 80 days a year, if I understood you right, where energy market prices in the midday period are like zero or negative. Did I hear that roughly right?
Yes. Spring, fall, non-summer months, we see that 80 to 90 days a year.
Okay, very good. So just to be clear, does that mean that at those times is the potential solar output of the fleet of solar in that area is the resource, or a resource that is being curtailed, for a group of, 1,000 megawatts in total? Are they being held, like through inverters or otherwise, to 800, for example? Is that what's happening on the margin?
What's happening is that in California, a lot of that power is being put on the wholesale market, because if they curtail it, they don't meet their renewable goals. And so in Arizona, we are able to take advantage of that opportunity to get 100% carbon-free energy in the wholesale market for APS customers. As we get more of our own duck curve, though, right, there's more and more of a challenge as to how we can take advantage of that. So we're actively trying to work with customers to figure out ways that we help to sponge that regional solar.
Thank you. Once again, depends on the regional circumstances
Right.
and the markets can inform what kind of activities can provide value and opportunity for customers. Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Tom, I have one question. Uh, as a utility, when you have got customers and you're looking at resources on your system that can be sent up to respond to wholesale market signals, how do you weigh the, which has the highest and best use for that resource? Whether keeping it at the distribution level is a better use of that resource than moving it up to the wholesale level, and whether how do you make sure that when someone wants to sell it to the wholesale level, that that resource doesn't impact the operation of the distribution circuit?
So we are definitely learning as we go on that, Mike. We've done a map of every DER in our that's in any program, as well as any we can map that have done interconnections. I can tell you on thermostats, there's not enough volume in any one feeder to give us issues. As we scale batteries and EVs and other things, we know that's not going to be the case. So it's very much on our radar. We have a new proceeding called distributed demand side aggregation within Arizona, and we're thinking a lot about all of those kind of issues, and actually are going through an RFP process right now to work with third-party aggregators and do some work with EPRI as well and some other entities to do some research around what that looks like as we scale. So it's definitely something that's very much on our radar, although we're not, so far, for better or worse, we're not at scale enough on the distribution side that we've really been focused more on system level. So far, we've been okay at that, but we've definitely had our eyes open on that issue.
Excellent. I guess what I was going to ask is, you mentioned a number of technologies, but one that was perhaps not mentioned was EVs, and which I understand is also on the radar, and probably based on what I've heard from one of the other utilities in Arizona, Salt River Project, penetrating rapidly. So I suspect it probably also is in the APS footprint. Do you, I mean, some of the ideas that probably Doug mentioned, and I'm sure you're familiar with other utilities as well, this notion of managed charging, the notion of at least having a time of use rate, but on top of that, perhaps to have active management of the charging. And then the ultimate elixir, so to speak, is vehicle to grid discharging of the car. How do you see those taking shape within the APS DER portfolio, just at a high level?
Yeah, and I'll start with the regulatory lag issue, which is that there was a lot of debate in Arizona about where EV funding belonged. And unfortunately, I think management of EVs got caught up in it a bit. And I finally was able to make the argument in the last DSM plan that management of the load is not encouraging EV adoption. It belongs in DSM. We received approval in July of this year to start a managed EV charging program, and so that's going to be kicking off fourth quarter of this year.
Even without that program, don't they have an opportunity to take advantage of the time of use rates? And that's like passively you sending a signal to them, this is the window of time in which we want you to program your EVs. Like in my case, I'm on a time of use rate. It's 3 periods. Off peak is midnight till 3 p.m. and then it begins to become more expensive. So most of my friends and neighbors who have EVs, they have just programmed their car. They have a level 2 charger at home or a 220 volt socket. Some still have a 110 volt socket, but they know when not to charge. They know when to charge. I go out and look at the superchargers around town, the Tesla superchargers, and they also now have a time of use rate, just 2 periods, peak and off peak. But over there, I see people mostly charging during the peak because they're shopping at the Target store. or the Safeway store, this is not first of mind for them. What do you have some general perceptions of what is likely to work or not work with EV drivers? Because honestly, they have bought the car for mobility, not for stationarity, which is what a lot of the utilities would like. Is utilities would like the customer to lend the car to them to be used as a battery. I think that's really a bit far-fetched. But what's your take?
Yeah, so I like the flexibility. So we've got about 4 different pieces to the EV managed charging that we're doing, and we're going to kind of, learn as we go, right? But I think one of the elements I really like is a rewards element that says, well, what if I want the flexibility to give you a reward for charging that might not be coincident with my rates? Maybe it's for solar absorption in the middle of the day. And we have a super off-peak rate on some rate plans, but not on others. So through a program we'll be launching with Geotab, we'll be actually doing EV charging management through the car itself, right? Through either a widget plugged into the car or through the car's own cloud-based controls that would collect data on when that car is charging at any and all stations, and then would encourage the customer. First of all, rewards that customer with a rebate for just providing us that baseline data.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's $25 for signing up and $5 a month for participating. But then what we're going to do is institute a rewards program where they could earn points towards gift cards or other rewards by charging at certain times, either charging off-peak or charging at specific times that we send out as a reward opportunity. And so I love the flexibility that we don't really have to, we can go outside of a tariff basis and do kind of a peak time rebates approach almost to EV charging. So that's one of the 4 or 5 different tactics we're going to try.
Excellent, excellent. We have covered a lot of ground. Thanks very much, Tom. We're now going to move on to Dick O'Neill, who is with the FERC. I have known him for a long time. He's the chief economist, and the specific issue he's going to address today is what are the costs and benefits of bid-in demand compared to current programs. And Dick, I would like you to briefly also tell us what is bid-in demand, because not everyone knows that term.
Thank you, Ahmad. That essentially is the central question. What is bid-in demand? It's essentially giving the consumers the options that the generators have, and that's probably as simple, at least stated, as you can get. And I'm, although in 10 minutes I'm sure I can't do this, but it is win for the consumers, win for the system, win for the economy, win for the environment, and a win for renewables. And I will try to make at least a set of arguments where we can have a debate. Let's see, advancing. There we are. U.S. power markets, wholesale power markets, are regulated by the FERC, and they are regulated under a just and reasonable standard. The just price has been around since ancient Greek philosophy, and recently is still being debated in regulatory commissions in the States and in some sense around the world. Until the 1990s, the just price was set by cost of service regulation. Consumers consumed, got a monthly bill, and then complained to their PUC that it was too high. Utilities made money by owning large capital investments. Generation followed load, and there were a bunch of peak load programs. I'm going to take a look at this from the view of the ISO. Now, we've had consumer participation in markets for quite some time. We've already seen some today, switches on equipment that will disable it. These at least initially approved easily to gain because you could disable the disabling equipment, and there was no measurement ability to find out who was doing that. We also had subsidies for high efficient equipment investment. one of the problems in ISOs with these kind of programs is they allowed high latency response that came too late when they needed it. They had zonal responses that didn't get the transmission constraints right and often caused more problems than they solved. And today, in some cases, and especially in the industrial case, and in Australia, Tesla has a program where they forecast prices and then sell scheduling into the market. Well, that's has a lot of problems, especially the fact that it causes market inflexibility at a time we're going to be needing more flexibility. PJM had a price responsive demand program that didn't get very far off the ground for a number of reasons that I won't go into. In some sense, there were a few instances where the consumption was able to participate in a way comparable to generators, but it was a very small program. And my question is, what worked and what didn't work? And I would argue that some of the above, and some of the above will work when load can participate in the market comparable to generators. And you have to realize the basic axiomatic fact of electric power in all markets is that there's the same amount of supply as there is demand. And it's interesting to look at load and how the power system has looked at it. I remember when I first encountered this at FERC, consumption was called negative generation, which was an interesting way to address consumption. And the utilities calculated things called the value of lost load, and I would argue it should have been curtailed load. The interesting thing about how consumers valued load was measured by the average capital cost of a combustion turbine. The only problem is when you went to estimate it, your assumptions could get you answers anywhere from $350,000 to $1,000 a megawatt hour. So that doesn't help. What we really should be dealing with is the value of load expressed by customers. And the value of load is probably considerably less than the value of curtailed load. And reserve requirements are public goods for consumers who want to self-consume, that is equivalent to self-scheduling. Consumers should try to avoid high prices, for example, scarcity prices, but also take advantage of low prices. That's a very, that benefit of bid and demand is often very much ignored. And I would argue that the first two presentations talked about taking advantage of low prices, but in some sense, it's very hard if you're not actually in the market to do that. So I'm going to present some questions and some answers, at least my answers. Why are most consumers missing from the ISO markets? Tradition, possibly. That's been the history of consumer participation. Maybe the answer is they want to pay more for power, or they just don't care. What is the best way for consumers to participate in the market? And I would argue that that is a bid in demand, comparable to generation. And by the way, I mean all demand, industrial, commercial, and residential. And what's the value of participation to a consumer? It's high, because if you don't actually participate in the market, you are participating based on a price that's historical, not the price in the current period. And if you can't react to the current price, you're taking a big gamble that the current price will be the same in the period you're thinking about taking advantage of it. It helps the system because it creates more flexibility in the system to both shave peaks and to shift demand, and in some cases, just not consume at all. Oftentimes, entities, especially ISOs, have worried about the computational burden of including the consumers. There's some evidence coming along that says that the computational burden is actually less because it creates more flexibility in the system. And that's one of the things we really want to promote. Is consumer participation green? Yes, it is, because one of the things about consumer participation is you consume more when the prices are lower and there's less curtailment of renewables. Also, bid and demand does not need a capacity obligation. And low-income consumers respond to dynamic prices. And that was demonstrated by a recent experiment that Ahmad was part of with the Maryland PUC, where low-income consumers were not oftentimes what people characterize them as, and did respond to varying prices. So again, I would just to repeat myself, we're going to see more renewables, more EVs, greater consumption, and a lot of weather-based reliability. This is going to create much more volatile energy prices, at least in ISOs, and that can be mitigated by demand participating in the market. In the future, it looks to me that load will follow generation and participate in reliability services to a much greater extent. Excuse me. Consumers should be treated comparable to generation and storage, which is not available today. And if we want to start the program, probably the greatest benefits would be to large industrials who can take advantage of the internalization of demand. And just as an example of that, if you are bidding in demand and the system is about to start up a new unit, a slight reduction in demand may avoid the cost of starting up and running at the minimum operating level of a unit that never was necessary if the bid in demand could shift the load or shave its peak. That information is...
Dick, unfortunately, I have to intervene. We are beginning to now run, unfortunately, a little bit behind schedule. If I could just ask you one question, because there are a lot of questions, interestingly, and a positive sign that people are posting that I want to make sure that we get to the audience Q&A. So I'm going to suggest we skip the questions from the panelists for the last two speakers. Otherwise, we'll have no time for audience questions. But I'll just ask you one definitional question, if you don't mind. Just a 1-minute definition of Order 2222. What exactly is it?
It basically says, if my reading of it says, and it's got a lot of legalese in it, is that anybody on the demand side or on the distribution side can participate in the ISO markets. And I think participation it includes not only filling your battery storage or charging your vehicle, but everything that the consumption of the consumers do. And it's much more efficient than time of use prices, which are, by their nature, are almost always wrong.
Got it. Okay, great. Thanks very much. We'll come back to you shortly. I will now invite Mike Oldak to give his presentation. We have 10 minutes, Mike, and the topic is rate design enough for tomorrow's distribution grid? So please take it away.
Thanks, Ahmad. I'm not sure that I'll agree or disagree with Dick. It's always difficult or dangerous to disagree with Dick, who's been an old friend of mine. But let me switch to the first slide here. One of the things that, sort of looking at the discussions from standing back, I'm not sure that we have really clearly articulated goals of where we want what I consider a new industry. And if you don't know where you're going, you're liable to end up somewhere else. And I don't mean to be these inclusive, but they're basically the environmental goals to reduce greenhouse gases, consumer goals, maintain reasonable rates, non-discriminatory treatment of customers. I think that's an important one that will really play up going forward, and I'll discuss. And then the grid goals. And as I said before, I want to see optimization of all resources, electric, gas, and water utilities, as well as consumer DER. And really, I think as Dick just alluded to, avoid unnecessary infrastructure investments or bringing on a new peaker. And I think, Ahmad, you have shown me over the years the incredible costs that utilities and consumers incur during critical peak periods, and all the money that could be saved and used for other purposes. The next slide. Some of the lessons that I think we should all take a look at going forward for a new, what I consider a high DER electrified building and transportation sectors, is we need situation awareness in real time. And I think we learned that lesson the hard way at the wholesale level. We need to know exactly what's going on the distribution grid, really circuit by circuit. I've seen some utilities where certain circuits are overloaded or getting close to being overloaded, reducing hosting capacity and the ability to bring on more resources. So I think we need to understand the capabilities of each circuit and the status of supply, storage, and the loads on that circuit. We need to have the grid to be optimized when all resources are leveraged for the good of everyone. And I guess that gets a little bit to what Dick was saying, and I've seen in the past where large industrial customers sell their responses up to the wholesale market, and they take advantage of the value that's created. And I'm wondering, I look at really optimizing. What we've done in the past is optimize transmission lines, and through coordinated planning and utilization, which ended up becoming RTOs and ISOs. And I think we can apply the same kind of concepts toward DER. Grid operations in the future, I think, requires a secure, and I can't state this, the grid of the future must be secure. It must be resilient, reliable, and a low latency, and I believe a private network. The President's National Infrastructure Advisory Council's #1 recommendation was for private networks to run the grid, and nothing should be connected to the public internet. And I think that's important because, as we've seen from the hurricanes, Sandy, Rita, Katrina, that these networks have to be up and running during the disaster and not a week later. And really, I think one of the prime cases in California, we've seen San Diego Gas and Electric now can de-energize a falling conductor before it hits the ground because they've got a network that's capable, that has the low latencies necessary. Next slide. And what do I consider optimization? And this is not an economist's view, it's mine. It used to be easy. When you had central station generation, you could turn that, add on a peaker, or you could go to the other side and through load management, send out a signal to water heaters and AC compressors, and really keep everything in balance. But in a world of high DER with the electrification of transportation and building, and I look at this at, a pretty forward look at where I think the distribution grid's going. We need three things. We need to, as I said before, monitor all the resources and the circuits. Number two, coordinate the operation of all those resources, and then appropriately compensate those who participate. and those who don't want to participate and just do what they want, then I think the rates should reflect the costs on the whole grid. Next slide, please. As I said, letting everyone do their own thing is not a good idea. And I sort of liken that to removing all the traffic signals and one-way signs from downtown New York City. Chaos is not a good look for a modern grid. So coordination to optimize resources while maximizing existing resources will require dispatch of exactly the right types of resources on exactly the right circuit at exactly the right time and for exactly the right length of time. And I think this is a pretty sophisticated and maybe futuristic, unfortunately, view going forward. But I think if you want to use these resources for their highest and best use, you're going to need a more specialized view and really more targeted, and then maximize the benefit each resources for the benefit of all. Next slide. And I question whether rates are enough. And I started out as a rate attorney for the Federal Power Commission. That's how long I've been doing this. And rates were supposed to be accurate, but in fact, they're pretty much blunt instruments. Avoiding undue discrimination, I think, is going to be an important question in the future. All customers within a class get the same rate options. You either get static rates or dynamic rates, but basically everyone's treated the same, and it's more on a almost distribution grid basis. And rates often require customers to see the rate and then respond. And as Ahmad has shown in the past, you do get responses. Some of them come a little bit late, but technology does provide better responses to those challenges. But I question, when I talked about undue discrimination, can you send specific rates to one set of customers on one circuit and not to a different circuit? And you do that to keep that one circuit in balance and not have to upgrade. Next slide. And that's where I sort of move away from rate design. And number one, I think we need them both. I think we do need rates as a first price signal consumers. But what I can look in the future, we need to really have targeted signals to controllable supply, demand, storage, and understand the non-controllable supply and demand and storage options that are out there. I think Brattle has shown in the past that coordinating resources has been able to increase hosting capacity by 4 times. That's allowing 4 times the number of DER on a specific circuit before you have to start investing in infrastructure. One example I might give is, you've got all these solar panels and a cloud comes by. Do you really need to put on a peaker or go to a peaking resource? Or can you just cut water heaters, AC compressors, or EV chargers on that same circuit and maintain the reduced load until that cloud goes by? And I know some utilities are already providing compensation for agreed upon flexibility. And Ahmad and I have had this discussion where, he's very concerned that the impact of flexibility and allowing his resources to be curtailed during a critical peak has some real impacts. I've been on a program on the East Coast for probably 10 years where I gave my local utility the ability to literally cut off my AC during critical peaks, and I've never noticed any impact. One of the California utilities has said that if they could get 50% of their customers on a flexible demand program, they could have spread the rolling blackouts in California so wide and far that no customer would have noticed any impact. Next slide. Next. Okay. There it is. Thanks. Uh, I see really a direct load control on a regional basis, and I really don't want to define what a region is. It could, start out as the large utility in a region that expands and provides modernization services to the small water and gas utilities. There are roughly about 50,000 small water utilities in the country that, number one, a lot of them don't have the financial capability to build a advanced communication network to provide modernization of their own system. But basically, if you had more of a regional communication networks, they could link those networks together, just like we used to do before wholesale markets, and we used to share the savings between two utilities based on their marginal cost of generation. We could leverage the large electric utilities, have poles and towers and above ground resources, where water utilities are mostly underground and don't have the ability to put up their antennas and run a advanced communication network. But I think even more important than that, a large utility can provide a world-class cybersecurity for many of those smaller utilities in their service territory. So I think, looking at this is sort of, I think rate designs are a first line of implementation toward modernization. But I think at the end of the day, we need to start working with consumers and compensating them appropriately for allowing the grid operator or the distribution system operator or the utility to leverage their resources in real time when necessary, and provide in times of emergency to turn off all of the water heaters and maybe AC compressors or limit the thermostats. And I think that's the way I see the future of the industry going, where we're working in a high DER environment with electrification of both transportation and buildings. Thank you, Ahmad.
Thank you, Mike. We will now look at the questions that have been posted, and I have picked a few, and I will ask them of each speaker. So if you could all please turn on your videos, all the speakers, then we will go through those questions. And let me begin with a question for Doug. And all we have time for is 1 minute answers, no more. If Green Mountain Power uses the battery, can the customer still also use it as their own backup resource at the same time? That's a great question.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is a good one. That's the core of the program. So in most conditions, put it this way, that access to use output of the battery to discharge or charge that I described, we're presently utilizing that access only a minority of the time, a limited number of hours. Most of the time, the battery is in a fully or nearly fully charged state, okay? So it's basically an automated backup. It's a form of resilience at the customer level. If the grid distribution voltage goes out, it automatically kicks in, and that's the normal state of affairs. We have a little bit of a program design challenge when sometimes there's a coincidence between two objectives, managing peaks and maybe some tough weather, thunderstorms, that type of thing are in town. And in general, we need to avoid, our practice is to avoid drawing down the batteries all the way, but and on a severe weather day, we really restrict discharge of the battery, so it's highly available as the backup source for the participating customer. But there's a little bit of tension in the program design.
If the customer has lost power, they're using the battery as a backup resource at the time. You cannot access the battery if you have no connection to the customer.
That's correct. In that status, if a storm comes through or what have you, a car pole accident knocks out service to the neighborhood or area where the participating customer is, the power wall is serving the home only, or could be another vendor as well, the home battery, and the premises are disconnected from the broader grid. So we only share during grid available conditions. We only discharge under grid available conditions. Yep.
Okay. The second question is, would your system have worked under Texas-like conditions? In other words, the Valentine's Day massacre, if I can call it that, would your system have worked and survived that scenario?
I think it certainly would work for a period of time. And it would depend very much on, I expect, on the customer's locale, whether they, for example, had solar power on their premises or not. My home happens to, and I pay that lease price. And if it's not ice on the panels, I could probably last a long time, many days. However, a customer who doesn't, or perhaps is in an area where the panels are iced, they would not have been able to ride through unless they heavily curtailed their own electric use on the premises. And there's an app to help them with that. But unless they really reduce their electric use, probably wouldn't be able to last through some of those 3 or 4 day instances, at least at normal consumption levels, Ahmad. But it's a very helpful tool, at least at the start, in an automated way, and can sometimes last quite a while.
The last question for you, and I've picked just 3, is how do you communicate with the battery, the Tesla battery, and how do you communicate with the EVs?
Presently, those are done through taking the batteries first. Tesla's Grid Logic platform, a proprietary platform, is the primary mode of signaling to the fleet of batteries or a subset of them the instruction, and that generally occurs over the internet with, I believe, a backup, potentially a backup mode, which I'm not recalling right now. And the car charger controls, I believe, are conveyed through the customer's home internet.
Oh, okay, got you. Excellent. All right. So turning to Tom, the first question I have is APS using community solar to reach customers that can't host distributed resources on site, in particular in public housing? Yes or no?
That's a really simple yes. And then what's happening is it's APS owned solar. We're giving customers a discount off of their bill for helping to co-host that. And we're doing kind of virtual billing essentially, right? With those customers, not exactly to the production of the system, but more like a lease for the ability to use the space. And then that is APS owned. It is going directly to the grid. And so we are curtailing that in the case where we see a bunch of free regional solar. We are curtailing that so that we're not exacerbating the duck curve issues on our own. So that's the control piece there.
Got you. Thank you. Second question is, do you envision the APS approach to involve aggregators more on the customer outreach or at education and marketing side? And in particular, the person is asking, is APS the most effective messenger for that outreach, or would it be better to use aggregators?
Well, we're going to find out because I'm helping APS run an RFP process right now where we have asked third-party aggregators to provide us 3 products. One is system capacity at any point in the system. The second is distribution locational capacity, flexible capacity both for summer peak as well as winter low load conditions. And that is for 6 particular feeders in the Phoenix metro area. And then the third product is for ancillary services. And they are going to be responsible for recruitment and everything in terms of bringing that load to the system. And, I think that my belief is that there's probably a collaboration, right? That I think all of them would certainly like to use the utilities logo in their marketing and mention that they are working with the utility, but we certainly would want to leverage those partners and, you know, the in-app devices, all those kind of things, right, that they have, that they can be messaging their customers and even recruiting new customers through whether solar installations that include batteries and or, you know, smart thermostats and other various DERs. So we will be working on that and selecting a finalist by the end of the year with the idea that hopefully by summer of 2022, we're already starting some aggregations with third parties where they are doing the recruitment in conjunction and in partnership with APS, but it is a bit of a different, you know, a different setup for implementation than our current program portfolio.
So multiple channels are being used, and we'll find out which is the most effective channel. Great.
What we're interested in also is how much does that add incremental capacity versus poaching our own internal programs. And I think that's one thing that we're concerned about, the potential of just kind of poaching the same customers.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, so turning to Dick O'Neill, the first one is, what is the difference between bid-in demand and dynamic real-time pricing from a customer perspective? Can you clarify the benefits and drawbacks of the two options?
I'd quickly to make several examples of this fact. And that is to say that if you're basically doing your dispatch off of an LMP announced price, that's a historical price. And what the current ISO markets do, especially the day-ahead market, but also the real-time market to a certain extent, is they look at the entire horizon, and they will schedule you in a way that minimizes your cost of operation and actually minimizes the system's cost of operation, or the system, or let's put it properly, the system efficiency or the overall value that the system supplies to consumers. And as a matter of fact, oftentimes prices are corrected. So if you're in the market, just like generators, you're guaranteed not to lose money. And also at the same time, you're supplying reserves to the system, and you're helping to balance the system. Those things don't usually occur very easily when you're operating outside of the market context. And the only way to take advantage of all of those is to be in the market expressing your values the same way the generators express their cost. Their demand and supply are mirror images of each other. And this is true especially true for large industrial customers, that they essentially have the ability to move their consumption around. And, you know, there's a big drive right now about hydrogen. What you want to do is you make your hydrogen is out of the market to a great extent. What you want to do is basically when California is throwing power into free power or negative power into Arizona, you want to have a process sitting there ready to take advantage of it, and one of it is to make hydrogen.
So Dick, the question was a simple yes/no question. Is there a difference between dynamic pricing and bid-in participation? Yes or no?
The answer is yes.
All right. Good, thank you. All right, let's go to the second question. The second question is, why does bid-in demand not need a capacity obligation?
Because the demand can get off the system. The reason we have reserves essentially is to keep the entities who are literally point estimates from having to be curtailed. And if you can get off the system, you are your own capacity resource.
Got you. Okay, thank you very much. All right, now it's Mike's turn. Mike, you say that technology enables better response, but there are challenges. What specific challenges are you referring to?
I think I agree. Yeah, I mean, you've shown the response to rates from customer participation and the jump that you get when you have technology responding to the price. It's probably more of my question on undue discrimination, and that on a specific line, if you send a price signal, a rate out there, and you get a person or a device to respond, is it on the right circuit? Is it, for the right resource, at the right time and for the right length of time? And I'm not sure, under current regulation, you can pick a certain circuit and send a high price signal, a dynamic price signal to that circuit for 10 minutes and not do that for other customers. I just don't see that being approved by any commission. And so, my view is that you have someone being able to multiplex all these resources. And, as we did, a long time ago with water heaters, you'll go on for 15 minutes, then your neighbor will go on for 15 minutes, and you spread it around, really. And therefore, you sort of spread that load or whatever you want to do. I mean, in Texas, from what I know about it, they have large circuits. And if you had critical loads on one circuit, that whole circuit was energized. While if you didn't, you were offline. If you could, in the Texas situation, turn off every water heater in Texas, or, turn back thermostats all over the place and do that, you might have been able to maybe more gracefully handle the situation rather than, one line at a time, one circuit at a time. And I think, as San Diego Gas and Electric has shown or said, that if they had 50% of their customers on a flexible demand, they could have spread that rolling blackout over so many customers that no one would have noticed. But I think you're both seeing, if you ask a CEO, what's the most important point, or I think a regulator or a legislator, it's reliability. Keep the lights on. And you can't push a movement toward DER too fast without keeping reliability as prime. You can't look at trying to keep rates as low as possible without having, reliability in mind. And I think those two concepts need to be part of the goals. Reliability as being one of the highest goals, with other things with, being considered along the way also.
Okay, excellent. Last question for you is, why is a private communication network needed for ISOs?
Okay.
One minute answer.
The private network, utilities have, and frankly, my time at UTC, I learned a lot about utility telecom. And basically, utilities out there have redundant communication networks, fiber optics, and unlike the carriers or the internet, those networks are never co-located. When the Baltimore Harbor Tunnel had a fire and it burned through all the cables, the carriers were out. Baltimore Gas and Electric was not, because they had another circuit not co-located. For utilities, when they build their towers, they put generators at every tower with 2 weeks of supply. So when a hurricane comes in and the lines go down, the generators kick in and they can restore the grid safely. A private network, LTE private network, is designed specifically for cybersecurity. It is upgraded continuously. When we built the internet, it was built to move data, and it is not private. It's really not that secure. It doesn't have the extreme low latencies. When you talk at SDG&E and being able to de-energize a line that
if you have to stop
the ground.
I'm getting the signal. And so I apologize for cutting you off there. Let me just conclude by saying that this is a discussion that really merited 3 hours. we were allocated an hour 45, but it's always better to end before the decline has begun. So I think we are ending on a high note. At one point, I counted there were 99 attendees, plus the panelists here. So it really has been incredibly interesting. Unfortunately, we couldn't get all the questions answered, but I will try to work with Ryan and see if we can get written answers from the panelists posted on the website so that everyone who asked a question will get an answer. I think that is what they expect when they sign on. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of the week. And I hope your lights stay on. Take care. Bye. All the best.